All righty. And y'all, I'm catching this on the recording just in case. If you see me like wrinkle my nose, it's something going on with the sinuses. All this weekend, I've been feeling like I might have to sneeze and I never do. So just if I start making funny faces, just disregard, okay? All righty. Welcome again, everybody. Good morning, man. It's such an awesome time to again come together as a mastermind group, right? And get better and sharpen our skills. And so we've been talking about adversity and learning from adversity. Man, just so many profound nuggets in this chapter of outwitting the devil. And as we left off, he talked about all the things that adversity does for us. And you know, it's so important that we catch that. Because when I think about different areas in my life in which I may have, made a change that changed my life, that did something different, it took my business or just everything to another level. It actually, when I look back and evaluate the seed of it, it was adversity. Accelerate was a product of adversity. So this is something we don't want to take lightly. And I encourage you to, continue to review that these pieces of what adversity does. And so Hill starts to hone in on, he says, well, what's the greatest benefit? And the devil says that the greatest benefit of adversity is that it may and generally does force one to change one's thought habits, thus breaking and redirecting the force of hypnotic rhythm. He says one of the first
page we're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we're on page 214, Rhonda.
229.
229. Okay, thank you. So sorry. I forgot that this morning. So yes, page 214 of the book, 229 of the PDF. Down towards the bottom half of it. And so he says the greatest benefit is that it breaks up, it forces us to change the thought habits. And it says thus breaking and redirecting the force of hypnotic rhythm. And Hill says, so in other words, failure always is a blessing when it forces one to acquire knowledge or to build habits that lead to the achievement of one's major purpose in life, if that's correct. And devil says yes, and something more. So I'm going to stop there for a second, though. Look at what he just said. He says failure, those things that we see as temporary defeat, the months that we don't hit our numbers, we don't make enough money, we don't, all of these things. He says that those are the best benefit of it is that it makes you take a look at what didn't I know before? What is something else that I can learn, or what habit got me to this point, and how can I change the habits? So what you got to get into your own habit is re-looking at anything that looks like that temporary defeat, anything that others might see as failure. Now I have the tools, I'm armed with how to pull the success out of that, because I know how to look at it and say, okay, what more knowledge can I acquire? What do I need to learn differently? And what habits, what are the things that I need to do differently? That's how we pull the equivalent advantage. That's how we pull the equivalent advantage. So my first thought with failure, my first thought with hitting a wall is go back and reevaluate, right? Like we said last week, that frustration is the source of creativity. All that equates to is, how do I now go create something from this? And so the devil says, yes, that is one of the best benefits. He says, but something more. Failure is a blessing when it forces one. Now get this sentence. This is awesome right here. He says, failure is a blessing when it forces one to depend less upon material forces and more upon what? Spiritual forces. He says, the failure is a blessing when it points you to go to the Spirit, your own spirit, and the Holy Spirit, when it forces you to depend on spiritual forces. It says failure is at its best when you stop just looking at you, but now you turn to the spiritual side of what's going on. Is that not huge? That's huge. Many human beings discover their other selves, the forces which operate through the power of thought, only after some catastrophe deprives them of the full and free use of their physical bodies. So he's saying when you come to the end of your talent, you've come to the end of your skill, you've come to the end. He says this is when you find yourself in some catastrophe, that now there's no more talent, there's no more skill, there's no more day to stay up, night to go to bed late, there's no more of that. That's when the forces, he said, come into play. When a man can no longer use his hands and his feet, he usually begins to use his brain. Thus, he puts himself in the way of discerning the power of his own mind. So it's like when we rely too heavily on just what we can do, that's always going to hit a wall, because the body is finite. The body has limitations, but the soul and the spirit do not. And, remember when we say things like you are limitless, you have no limit. Remember, the part of you that is limitless is the spirit and the soul. Those are the pieces that must be released. That's where the focusing in on your limitlessness is. So he says, when you can't use your hands and feet anymore, when you've done all you can physically do, you get forced into this position to pull on the eternal part of you. And Sharon Lecter makes a note here that the devil brings in his other self, revealing how we can use our power of thought in our other selves. And, just kind of, it's interesting that the devil has to recognize your spiritual power also. And so Hill says, what benefits may be derived from the loss of material things? Money, for example. The loss of material things may teach many needed lessons, none greater, however, than the truth that man has control over nothing and has no assurance of the permanent use of anything except his own power of thought. I wonder if this is not the greatest benefit available through adversity. And the devil says, no, the greatest potential benefit of any circumstance which causes one to make a fresh start is that it provides an opportunity to break the hypnotic rhythm and set up a new set of thought habits. So, he's like, you can, this thing, anytime you feel like you've experienced a loss, he said, even in the loss of money, that the circumstance can make you start over and recreate a new way of thinking. You can build new set of thought habits. He says, new habits offer the only way out for people who fail. New habits offer the only way out. So he's like, if you're not living, if you are not performing as the person you should be, if you are missing the mark in any way, the only way out, he says, is to change your habits, because your habits are what got you there. Most people who escape from the negative to positive operation of the law of hypnotic rhythm do so only because of some form of adversity, which forces them to change their thought habits. And I think about here, this scripture of all things being new, that he gives us new mercies every day. We have new branches in our brain that form every day to hold new information, hold new information. And so he's saying here that's the only way that you can move from a negative to a positive operation of this law, is to change those habits. And so I wonder if you would, I think, it's beneficial for everybody at some point to evaluate your habits. And your habits are, what are the things that you're routinely doing every day? If you were to sit down and write out what your whole day looks like from the moment you get up, What's the first thing you do? Do you pick up your phone? Do you turn off the alarm? Do you check this message? Do you go to what? If you were just to sit down and go take one day and write that whole day out, you'll be amazed at even what habits you don't realize you have, but you do them so often. Then that gives us empowerment to go back and now say, what was the train of thought that had me doing these things this way for this long? And does it still serve me in this next phase? Right? These are the areas that we can make some now new trains of thought, but we have to become aware of them first. And Hill says, isn't adversity apt to break one's self-reliance and cause one to give up hope? It has that effect on those whose willpower is weak through long established habits of drifting. So we've talked about this before, where the devil brings this up, that the only drifters are the ones who get caught up and quit because of adversity. It says it has the opposite effect on those who have not been weakened through drifting. The willpower is weakened when we drift. It says the non-drifter meets with temporary defeat and failure, but his reaction to all forms of adversity is positive. So it says no matter what he runs up against, he's always going to see the positive. He's always going to be able to pull the creativity. He's always going to be able to see what he can learn. So you're a non-drifter when you do that. He fights instead of giving up, and usually wins. All right, so he fights instead of giving up, and he usually wins. So that's what he's saying. The non-drifter goes into fight mode. When I see something didn't go right, I'm going to go evaluate the situation. I'm going to pull everything out of it that I can. And y'all, this is, I hopefully you're recognizing, the patterns in our own business, particularly when people come into business, how quickly they quit. Okay. You're seeing now the reasons why, because there's really two types of people that deal with adversity, what he calls drifters and non-drifters. Life gives no one immunity against adversity, but life gives to everyone the power of positive thought, which is sufficient to master all circumstances of adversity and convert them into benefits. So he says, no, there's going to, the Bible says, rain will fall on everybody. Okay, everybody will hit some sense of adversity. He says, but the great equalizer is the fact that you have the ability to think in this circumstance and convert any circumstance of adversity into benefit for you. The individual is left with the privilege of using or neglecting to use his prerogative right to think his way through all adversity. He says this is a privilege for you to be able to use your right to think your way through. Every individual is forced either to use his thought power for the attainment of definite positive ends, or by neglect or design, use this power for the attainment of negative ends. So he's either way, it's going to work for you. In this situation, it's either going to get you the benefit, or your neglect of it is going to ensure that there is only a negative outcome. The only outcome is I quit. And I never get past even learning how. That's one of the things that I try to point out to people when they start in business. We ask this during our coaching times with them, is when has there been a time in your life that you have overcome an obstacle? When is there something, what's happened when you wanted to quit and you did it? What did you pull on? What did you rely on to help you keep going? And we ask that question because, number one, we want to point out that you have the skills to think your way through adversity. And see, there's some people who, in any instance, anytime they hit up against a wall, they just immediately back down, and they never learn to come past those walls. And inevitably now they're in that mode of drifting in which they have to accept whatever life has given them. Whatever circumstance come their way, they have to just continually accept it. And the devil says here in this last sentence, it says, there can be no compromise, no refusal to use the mind. He says, there's no way you're not going to use your mind in some way. It's either going to be you driving it, or by neglect, the environment drives it. Okay. It says the law of hypnotic rhythm forces every individual to give some degree of use, either negative or positive, to his mind, but it does not influence the individual as to which use he will make of his mind. So he says, by virtue of having a mind, you must use your mind, but you're not told if it's going to be negative or positive. That's up to you. And Sharon Lecter makes the same note we just talked about a time when, you didn't give up. That's a muscle that has to be exercised. The mind is a muscle to be exercised. How to think through, use adversity, temporary defeat as a catalyst. That's an exercise that you can get stronger at doing. And so Hill says, am I to understand from what you say that every adversity is a blessing? No, I did not say that. I said that there is a seed of equivalent advantage in every adversity. I did not say that there was a full-blown flower of advantage, just the seed. This is huge. This right here, this one sentence changed everything for me when I first read this book. Because this is often why people don't recognize God answering prayers. It is in seed form. I say this all the time. And this was honestly the first time that dawned on me when I first read this book, is that the answers are often in seed form, whether it's about how God is answering a prayer, or whether it is something bad that has happened. And now I have to pull, like the devil says, the equivalent advantage. But the difficult part for people is that advantage is a seed. It's the beginning stages. It doesn't even look like what the advantage will look like down the road. But it's the beginning stages of it. And most people walk away from the answer because it's the seed. The acorn looks nothing like an oak tree. Looks nothing like an oak tree. And if you wanted to plant a whole forest of oak trees and never knew what an acorn looked like, you'd step on it, step over it, step around it, and never even pick it up and realize that was the answer. Our business is very much the same way. It's a seed that has to be sown, tilled, tended to, cared for, worked with. And God designs things this way because, again, overarching of any formula, this is why I always say, if somebody gives you some God-driven formula for success, honey, listen, it doesn't work that way, okay? Not that there aren't laws, but overarching any of this is your relationship with him. And that must be intact in order for you to be able to learn how to put those laws into effect. Because the way that he grows something with Steph is going to be different from the way he grows something with me. We are going to use the same laws, but they are going to play out differently because of my relationship with God, her relationship with God, her skills, her gifts. He's going to use those specifically for her. He's going to use mine specifically for me. So relationship tops all of that. So the seed is for the building of the relationship. Learning communication skills. connecting with creativity. The seed is necessary. The seed is exciting. So this is what the devil says. I didn't say you got the full-blown flower. I didn't say that you're going to pull out the whole result. Usually the seed, he says, consists of some form of knowledge, some idea or plan, or some opportunity which would not have been available except through the change of thought habits forced by the adversity. So he's like, that seed comes in the form of you realizing, I need to learn something different. I need to have a different idea. I need to change my plan. The seed comes in that fact of being able to recognize, I got to switch up the way that I do things. And now that I had to go through that, now I know and understand XYZ. Now I better know how to make my plan more specific. Now I better know how to structure my day. You see? And Hill says, all those are those all the benefits available to human beings through failure? No, failure is used by nature as a common language in which she chastises people when they neglect to adapt themselves to her law. So he's like, you get failure when you are not relating to the laws properly. He says, for example, the World War was man-made and destructive. Nature planted in the circumstances of the war the seed of an equivalent reprimand in the form of world depression. The depression was inevitable and inescapable. It followed the war as naturally as day follows night by the operation of the self-same law, the law of hypnotic rhythm. So he says the moment people are not relating properly to these laws, nature comes in and throws a monkey wrench. One follows the other. Hill says, so what he's talking about here is the law of compensation. He says, is that the law that you're referring to? And he says, the devil says the law of hypnotic rhythm is the law of compensation. It's the power with which nature balances negative and positive forces through the universe in all forms of energy, all forms of matter, and in all human relationships. Does the law of hypnotic rhythm operate quickly? For example, does the law immediately bless one with the benefits of positive application of thoughts, or curse one immediately with the results of negative thoughts? He says the law operates definitely, but not always swiftly. And herein lies the dilemma for most people. The positive way of thinking correctly, doing the right things, don't often have the quickest payout. And so, and this is what he's addressing here. It says both the benefits and the penalties incurred through the law by individuals may be harvested by others either before or after their death. So he's saying not only is it delayed gratification for you, but what he's saying is what you do has generational effects. Generational effects. The way that your family thinks, for instance, my dad's side of the family have been entrepreneurs since they first came into this area of Phoenix City, Alabama. That's all they were, even at a time where Black people were not entrepreneurs. They always thought that way. They were either entrepreneurs or we have one side that was educators. That was the only two things you did. Right? And in such, that was always the pattern of thinking in our family. That was something that was generational. But I'll tell you what else was generational. They didn't trust white people. Okay. And this is straight up. They did not, because they came up in a time in which that was very hard to do, especially for people who were of color and had money, had some kind of prominence in a time when they weren't supposed to. But it was often passed down the way that you would see other races. Okay. So what I mean by what he's saying here, the way that they talked, the environment they created in our house, generations to everything, played into what happened generation after generation after generation in our family. And the same is true for you and after. Your thought habits, he says, you may not see them all, but your generations after you will. He says, observe how this law works by forcing upon one generation of people the effects of both the sins and the virtues of preceding generations. In the operation of all the nature's laws, the fourth dimension, time, is an inexorable factor. The length of time consumed by nature in the relation of effects to their cause depends in every instance on the circumstances at hand. So basically he's saying time is something you can't get around. And how swiftly you get those consequences determines, it is based on whatever the circumstance is. Okay, he says, nature grows a pumpkin in 3 months. A good-sized oak tree requires 100 years. She converts a hen's egg into a chicken in 4 weeks, but she requires 9 months to convert the egg of a human being into an individual. So he says it depends on what it is as to how long it takes. The same thing is happening here. Something new is being born. One, it takes a couple weeks. One, it takes a couple hundred years. One of it takes, months. But bottom line is, he says that's kind of the thing that you're not going to see things right away. And that's one of the most important areas that we can work on renewing our mind on, is understanding that even as the things that we do that we're supposed to do may not have the immediate payoff, but they will have the payoff, right? And so dropping into the next chapter, we'll start off here with, these are the last pieces of the 7 principles. Y'all, we're coming to the end of this book here. Can you believe it? Still going to take a few, a little bit of time, but this is the end of it here. So the last few pieces of those 7 principles of untying ourselves from the negative work of the law of hypnotic rhythm. And it's an environment, time, harmony, and caution. And so Hill starts off by saying, now I have a better understanding of the potentialities of adversity and failure. You may go ahead now with your description of the next of the 7 principles. What's your next principle? The next principle is environmental influence. And so Hill says, well, let's, go ahead, let's get into it. And the devil says environment consists of all the mental, spiritual, and physical forces which affect and influence human beings. So environment is not just where you live. It's not just where you work. It says the mental, spiritual, and physical forces. What are you surrounded with physically, spiritually, and mentally? Check, that's how you check your environment. He'll ask, what's the connection between the environmental influence and hypnotic rhythm? Well, of course, as we read before, hypnotic rhythm solidifies and makes permanent the thought habits of human beings. Thought habits are stimulated by environmental influences. In other words, the material on which thoughts are fed comes from one's environment. Thought habits are made permanent by hypnotic rhythm. So they say the environment, of course, has everything to do with it, because that's what influences how you think the most. What you're around the most influences how you think. So thought habits are made permanent. Your environment makes your thought habits. Hill says, what is the most important part of one's environment? The part which determines more than all the others whether an individual makes positive or negative use of his mind. Now, here's what he says. Out of the physical side of your environment, the most important part of one's environment is that created by his association with others. And we've heard that so much, right? about who you associate with. And the devil is saying here that this is the most important factor of whether you become, whether you're thinking negatively or positively, is by your association with other people. All people absorb and take over, either consciously or unconsciously, the thought habits of those with whom they associate closely. Whoever you're around the most, whoever you're influenced by the most, he says that's who you're going to pick up those habits from. And he says, do you mean that by this, that constant association with a person whose thought habits are negative influences one to form negative thought patterns? Yes. Yes. So, when you think about it, this is why, what does the Bible say about being unequally yoked? Is that just around religious beliefs? No. I mean, why would I be, if I'm trying to be positive, why would I continue to hook up with somebody being negative all the time to influence myself with that person? Why would I come into partnership and agreement with someone who thinks differently? So this is what he's addressing here. He says, yes, the law of hypnotic rhythm forces every human being to form thought habits which harmonize with the dominating influences of his environment, particularly that part of his environment created by his association with other minds. So what he's saying is that you can't stay in an environment long without either coming into harmony with that environment. Otherwise, it rubs you such the wrong way that you have to get out of it. So you're either going to change your thinking so that you conform and have harmony. That's the thing. Your body, your mind, your spirit wants to be in harmony. And when it's not, it has a hard time staying in the situation, or it will adapt to that situation. That's what he's saying. So you have to be very careful. As a man thinketh, this is what he is. He says, and he says, then it is important that one select one close associates with great care. Yes, one's intimate associates should be chosen with as much care as one chooses the food with which he feeds his body, with the object always of associating with people whose dominating thoughts are positive, friendly, and harmonious. Hence the tribe, right? We associate, we gravitate towards each other for that reason. Which set of associates has the greatest influence? He says one's partner in marriage and in the home, and one's associates in his occupation. Those are the two places you spend your most time, your occupation and at home. And these are the ones, he says, after that come close friends and acquaintances. Casual acquaintances and strangers have but little influence on one. So, of course, he says here, those are the places you need to check your associations for sure at home. Now, Sharon Lecter makes a note here around, have you ever felt, your attitude or your mood change when somebody just walks into the room who's negative? Yeah. And she says, if it is your business partner, evaluate if the relationship is one you want to save. You have to evaluate. That's one of the things I'll say this, about our particular business, and the business structure is such that because we have so much support from the home office as well, and you have other associations that you can create, you are not bound by just the person who, attracted you to the business or helped you get started in business. In other instances, having to detach from a business partner would be detrimental. It would mean folding the entire business. Whereas here, if there are misalignments, you can still find other alliances. You can still build something here, even if you did have to detach from certain other associations. And that's awesome. It's an awesome opportunity. So he'll ask, why does one's partner in marriage have so great influence? Because relationship of marriage brings people under the influence of spiritual forces of such weight that they become dominating forces in the mind. So he's talking about marriage here. He says is a spiritual connection outside of just that physical relationship. Marriage is a is a spiritual force. It brings in this power of agreement. There's no higher agreement really than the two that God has put together, right? And so he says, how can environmental influences be used to break the grip of hypnotic rhythm? All influences which establish thought habits are given permanency through the law of hypnotic rhythm. One may change the influence of his environment so that the dominating influences are either positive or negative. And the law of hypnotic rhythm will make them permanent unless they are changed through one's habits of thought. So he says here, the environment has to be changed, period. That's the only way. You're either going to change the environment. You got to either conform to the environment or change the environment. That's all there is to it. So if your environment is negative, you must change that. And Hill says, stating this truth another way, one may submit himself to any environmental influence desired, whether positive or negative, and the law of hypnotic rhythm will make the influence permanent when it assumes the magnitude of thought habit. That's correct. Be careful of all forces which inspire thought. Hill says, so I can lend myself to any environment I want. That's a power I have. I can put myself in any environment I want. The devil says, yes, but be careful of all forces which inspire thought. Those are the forces which constitute environment and determine the nature of one's earthly destiny. Those are the forces. He says, anything that makes you have to think, any environment that makes you think, that is going to be the thing that's going to determine which way you go, whether you attain what it is you're supposed to attain here. Okay. And we'll finish this last set of questions right here. What class of people controls their environmental influences? The non-drifters. All who are victims of the habit of drifting forfeit their power to choose their own environment. They become the victims of every negative influence of their environment. So he's like, non-drifters are the only one who are even cognitively aware enough to say, this is not good for me. I need to change this. Otherwise, we will stay in that same cycle, in the same environment. And just like we talked about earlier, the devil says, not only are you in that environment, but your decision-making, even this non-conscious decision-making of environment is now lasting for generations. It's why the kids come in the same cycle, and the grandkids are in the same cycle, and so on and so forth. So just like the devil says, we have to be very aware and careful about the environments and how they make us think, right? All righty, we're going to stop right there for today. And anybody have anything they want to add?
I do, since nobody spoke up real quick. All right, so on 220, when he was talking about all people absorb and take over either consciously or unconsciously the thought habits of those with whom they associate closely. And this made me think, because when we read this book the first time, it's when I really found myself thinking about how we communicate in our home. And
You're freezing up a little bit, Lakita.
oh man.
You're back now.
Oh, okay.
We heard how you speak in your home.
Okay, can y'all hear me now?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. And so when going through this book the first time, it had me think about, with my family. And I like to think that we have a, nice, stable home. But I did find myself also in prayer asking God, to reveal to me in some areas that I need to work on. And I felt Him showing me through my children and some of the things that would make me upset and correct them. I noticed that those were things that they picked up from me because I was like, hold on. I find myself sometimes doing these things and the way they were reacting, I was like, whoa.
Mhm.
So just, and so, you hear that saying, pick and choose your battles. So then that's when the rewiring of a lot of things that have changed in our home. And believe me, we're still working on these things, but it just allowed me to sit back and really see what they had picked up from mommy and daddy, and so that was one thing that, was very eye-opening and till this day still is. And then on page 222, when he says, be careful of all forces which inspire thoughts, it made me think, and I know we shouldn't talk politics and things like that, but we're now moving into some type of part where mass shootings are becoming common. And it made me think of the mental mindset of people who get caught up in like these radical groups, because there's so much they're exposed to. And when their minds are filled, that they feel like their way is to go out and do these particular actions on people all around them. And so it made me think about that and just knowing how powerful our minds and thoughts are and which way is our hypnotic flowing, the rhythm, is it in the negative or if it's in the positive. But I just wanted to share those two things
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
what I thought.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I would like to say how awesome it is, Nikita, and your sharing, that we have this type of format where we can read together the Word of God, and we can read from someone who was trained as a lawyer, so he's arguing both sides in this book, but giving us insights, and then we're able to do a review. And Jacinta having read the book previously, but coming to it with a set of fresh eyes, and all of us adding to it, how much more aware your children are going to be as they're walking through their lives, simply because mommy is on this call. And as mommy transforms the whole family.
Mhm.
The One of the new nephews that I met over in Ghana sent me a picture the other day of his wife gleaning cassava, but that's not why I want to read this. Just came to pull this up. He gave a quote that was really mind-boggling. He said that he was actually so here we are harvesting cassavas. There's a goat following her because the goat smells it and wants some, right? We laughed about that. But he says, I'm intentionally assisting her to unlearn what America taught her and relearn what a true African life looks like, regardless, because a woman is capable of changing and impacting a generation. She's more capable of doing that than a man, because when you educate a woman, you educate a whole nation. But when you educate a man, you educate an individual.
Mhm.
And I thought about that. We're the nurturers, generally speaking. Um, Girls usually talk before boys do. So we're communicating more. Boys are generally sent out to go play. Girls are stay home and help mom run a household or whatever. So I want to acknowledge you for sharing so openly, because it impacts all of us. And even while we're on this call, I have grandsons, and I'm able to have language to sprinkle in there what Fiji might say. So Jacinta shares very, very candidly her life in her ministry. And so I want to acknowledge you in that as well, without which we wouldn't have this forum to come and have a safe place to hear with ears of the Spirit what thus says the word about these things that we deal with every day, so that we can be empowered and change our thoughts. And what is it? The word that says, be transformed by renewing your mind, and then you'll be able to prove what is that good and acceptable will of God. So we're all helping each other prove what that good and acceptable will of God is as we're doing this thing, which seems to be, why would you do this in the middle of the day? Because we're taking a lunch break or a coffee break or a negative break to get some positive energy and fuel to go ahead out here and make a difference. So that's my part today.
Amen. Yes, yes. Yeah, I remember the first time, Lakita, last year that you shared with us about some things that you were doing differently with your kids and how that changed them. And, that moment has stuck with me. And made me tear up then. It almost makes me do the same now, because I realized that I never even thought about that impact from this call. I never even considered that. I was trying to create a space for people. And when that became generational, it never dawned on me about how people would take this and then do, differently. It's just a blessing of my heart, to hear those kind of things shift. And now we see them, happening for so many people. And it's such an honor. It is such an honor. And Devarius, we acknowledge you, honey, as well. All the men here. It's always been interesting to me as well to watch, because the call, and I would definitely encourage you men, to keep reaching out to other men. The call has always been more women than men. And I hadn't quite put my finger on why that is, but it does. It is such, being a mother of boys, it is a joy to see men who also want to step in their place and take a stand and get better, to be the lead of their family, because men need to see other men. It's men need to see other men. And so any man that will stand up, in this environment and be willing to see the parts of them that are not just, the physical. Men are taught more about barreling through and just putting the blinders on and, that's the expectation of a man. And to deal with the spirit and the mind are almost, that's too emotional. It's too many feelings. You don't need to have that many feelings, but that's not it at all. It's the control center of everything that we do until we get this thing in proper alignment, so yes, I appreciate the men that are on here as well, and continue to encourage you to invite men that need that refreshing, also. So,
and to also use your voice, because there are a lot of times where we know you hear things, but you may not say them. And and nephew knows as well my heart concerning this. If anybody who knows me knows, men need to hear certain things from men. When they hear it from us, it's like, that's just her talking again. It's just the female nurturing. And we had a great example of that the other day. And I will call upon you, nephew. Can you share what you shared with Stacy when it, and how that impacted him about nurturing new people?
Absolutely, Auntie, I will. I basically was saying, well, first of all, Jacinta, And Miss Bobbitt, and, everyone on the call, thank you for giving us a safe space. Like, y'all just don't understand the impact that not only you're doing for each and every one of our teams, but for our homes, like Miss Bobbitt is saying. It make me, this book made me realize some improvements, some tightening up I could be able to do as being a better father and a better leader. So I just want to say thank you before I answer Auntie and her statement. But when I was speaking with one of her business partners, and I was telling him that as a new recruit, if you treat a new recruit like a newborn baby, well, you have to nurture that baby, and you got to nurture that new recruit just like you nurture a newborn baby. Because if you got released, we was talking about tighten up the system. If you got released, and when y'all deliver y'all children and got released from the doctor office, did you put your baby in the front seat, or did you put your baby in the back seat, right? And I was telling him, don't put your newborn baby in the front seat. Put your newborn baby in the back seat and allow the parent as the coach take the baby and guide the baby and show the baby what we need to do. And we were talking about that top 10 list and going to get that list and stop letting these new babies try to make these appointments.
Awesome. Awesome. Good job. That was great. That was great. Thank you for that. And, Steph is so right. And this is the beauty of a collective. It's the beauty of a collective, because we all do have everything, something that we can bring to the table for each other that may not have anything to do with my business specifically or your business specifically. But that's what this mastermind is all about. That's what this, pulling together of what God has pulled together is all about. So it's a beautiful thing. Thank you for that, Devarius. So anybody else have anything they want to add before we hop off? All right. Yes,
Just
ma'am.
like
Amy. Go ahead.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yes. Oh no.
Oh,
Oh no. I'm sorry. I didn't see. I saw Timmy's hand go up, but then I
okay,
heard
good.
something, didn't realize it was you. But go ahead, Vivian. Go ahead. You already talked.
No, I would just like to say this group, this call, this book has really made a difference in my life personally. I see areas that I definitely need to improve on and working on those improvements. But most of all, just recently, I had the awesome opportunity to talk to my nephew, and he's early 20s, and they have a very different mindset. And he taught me some things about their language and taught me some things about what happens in their generation. But I was also able to impart upon him things of wisdom that I've learned from just being in this group, our thought process, our habits, and just some general things about what he needs to think about going forward. The things, his associations, his goals, his idea of what he wants to accomplish in life, and the impact that it has from day one, from the time he makes a decision until future. So I really thank you and thank God for this call, because it has really made a difference in the way I think and things going forth, and having Christ in the center of it all. And we talked about that as well. It's just been a wonderful thing, a wonderful book and exercise, and just being with you guys. It has made all the difference.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Vivian. We love you, honey. Go ahead, Timmy.
I just would like to ask for prayer, because this isn't the first time, but it's been plenty of times where I've ignored that I'm not in the environment that I should be in.